Thank you everyone for joining the Optimal Digital Ad Sales Process. This is a webinar series that we did last year. We're doing it again this year, some updated content, some new guests, especially later on in the series. But what we're really doing here is exploring the digital ad sales process and the optimal process that works for a lot of our customers. Today is kind of an overview. So we're going through all eight parts of our ad sales process. Actually, we broke it up into 12 parts, but we're exploring it both today and over the next 7 webinars. So that happens over 2 months. I have the link to register for those webinars later on, if you didn't already. So joining us today is Annette Batson. Annette is the all-star sales rep for BaristaNet. Just lots and lots of ad sales wisdom and always adds so much to the webinars. So
hi everybody.
And so as we're going through this process, there is that chat window in Zoom. Go ahead and type in your questions either for myself or Annette, and we'll periodically keep an eye on those and go ahead and answer those. So one thing that's going to differ a little bit this year as opposed to last year is that we'll save questions for kind of like in between slides, because we are going to package up this webinar series. We're going to do, over the next 2 months, 8 of these different webinars, but we're going to package them up and make them available to everybody. So we kind of did that last year, but not officially. This year, we're officially doing it. We have the webinars redesigned. And someone said there's no one on my screen. And just a quick sanity check. Annette, you can see my screen, right?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. And I'm assuming other people can. It looks like Rose doesn't see anything on my screen. Chris sees it. Okay, perfect. So we got somebody you can't see, and I'm guessing that's more of a user error. So worst case, we'll get the recording to them later on. Okay, let's get it started. So again, today is exploring the optimal digital ad sales process. What are the steps that our customers who are the most successful go through in the ad sales process? Now, one thing to note is that there are items that people who are completely new to ad sales will find useful. In fact, you'll find the entire series useful, but those who have been doing it for a while, maybe you've been doing ad sales, but you never really had any formal ad sales training. I mean, I could raise my own hand there when it comes to sales. I never had any formal sales training, but it just became something that I did through Broadstreet. And if you are an experienced salesperson, maybe you're formally trained, or you just really have a good hang of it, you're going to get a lot of out of this too, especially as we dive deeper into the individual parts of that ad sales process. So just a little bit of background about Broadstreet. If you're new to Broadstreet, many of the people on the webinar today are Broadstreet customers, but for those of you who may not know what Broadstreet is, created in 2012, Broadstreet is an ad manager that focuses on direct sales. We have a commitment to client prosperity. So we want to make sure that all of our customers are as successful they can possibly be, because we also know that things have changed quite a bit in the last 10, 15 years, especially digitally. And ad sales isn't so much the same because there's a lot more competition. So we want to make sure our customers are successful. And our vision is to be the best possible platform for direct digital sales. Is that when we're talking about direct digital sales, Broadstreet more or less should be in that conversation. But that said, it is not a product pitch. This is not, hey, let's get everyone on a webinar and talk about Broadstreet. This is specifically about direct sales, whether you apply it with Broadstreet or not. We may mention Broadstreet in some places, especially where it's helpful in certain areas of the sales process. That's probably more likely in the later segments of the webinar series. And again, this is the revised 2020 version of an 8-part series that took us a whole year to do, because we're putting all the material together, getting everybody lined up, and this is like the refined, crystallized version of the series. So today we're going to do an overview. We're going to talk about these 12 areas of digital ad sales, the competition, all right? Before we really dive into ad sales, we need to stop and think. Who are we competing with for that same advertiser budget? There are a lot of advertisers today, and there are probably new advertisers springing up. And that's really what's changed for the most part with advertising sales, is that there's so many people vying for the same advertising budgets. So I want to figure out who they are, what they're offering, what their pricing is, before we kind of set our own pricing. And that's that second piece, packaging and pricing. What are the packages that we're putting together for advertisers? All right, we want them to be pretty easy to execute, but also understandable in terms of pricing. We also need those packages to kind of set us up to hit our goals. So we'll talk about packaging and pricing, talk about methodology. So even the most disciplined salespeople kind of fall out of this sometimes. What is that methodology you're using in terms of staying on in that loop of executing on your sales process, reaching out to people, setting up meetings, all that kind of stuff. So how are you keeping track of all that? Really just good sales habits. Something that you learn over time as you talk to more people are your different client segments. Who are the people that you tend to work with? I know from talking to so many publishers that sometimes I get somebody on the phone and I can practically, I know what their problems are, what their issues are before they even really say them. So you get to know those different client types over time, and that helps you kind of craft the solution that's going to work out best for them. Getting the meeting. So when we talk about ad sales, this is kind of the part that everyone really thinks about. Those first 4 steps, we have questions about them, but getting the meeting is always the big one. So we're going to talk about that today. And that's actually one of my favorite webinars because we go over some of the scripts that we've used internally, that some of them used by our customers, some of the things that we'll say either by email or by phone to kind of entice somebody to take that 10, 20, minute meeting with us. And then the actual meeting, like, oh, wow, we got a meeting with somebody. Somebody said, yes, come swing by. Now, what do we do? What are we going to do in that meeting? And then the proposal. So something that's usually left out, especially by people who are new to ad sales, is that proposal piece. We'll talk about why it's not just a formality, why it is such an important part of the sales process. We also have an example proposal template that you can use. Rewards and upsells, closing, collecting, check-ins, renewals, those are other big parts of the process. We'll talk about really tips and tricks in all of those areas. So we're going to go through most of that today. If you are interested in those upcoming webinars where we do take that deep dive into each segment, and there's always great conversation that kind of follows. It's not just, we go off slides. Some of the emerging conversation is probably some of the, is usually the best part of it because we get a lot of ideas, not only from people who are listening in, but, kind of gets me or Annette, saying something that we didn't actually plan, that wasn't part of the original webinar content. You just get a lot of good things that pop out of that. So if you're interested in the next webinars, broadstreetads.com/webinars, that'll take you to the page where you can register for all upcoming 7 webinars. And we already had a bunch of people sign up for all 7, but if you do want to at least sign up for the next couple, that's the URL you can use to register there. And also on our support site. So inside our dashboard, if you click on support on the top right, that'll take you to our support site. If you click on webinars on the top right, that'll take you to the same page. And then lastly, I know we've really been pushing this, 10 advantages. If you haven't read 10 advantages, I can tell that some people, they fill out the form to get 10 advantages, but they might not read it because then they fill out the form again later on. There's a lot of information packed into 10 advantages. It's not a marketing piece. It's more of a thought piece. Really talk about what your advantages are. As somebody who's a direct salesperson or an independent publisher, what are the things that you're really good at that you have over a Google and Facebook? Sometimes it seems like they have all of the power, and it's not really true. There are a lot of things that you can do. And in fact, there are a lot of things that you can do and other things that you shouldn't do that they can do really well, right? So everyone's got their strengths and weaknesses. So you want to play to your strengths and avoid any weaknesses. So let's move on. Thank you, Tiffany, for posting the links in that chat. So again, as we move through, definitely feel free to ask any questions. In fact, we encourage it. And we're going to try and finish up by the 1:45 mark. And but in between, we do have conversation that comes up, questions that come up. So we'll try to address those too. But that last 15 minutes will be reserved almost exclusively for Q&A. So assessing the competition. It's a good way to start. Assessing the competition. Who's competing for the same money and what are they offering? All right, so we have Facebook, we have Google, we have Yelp, we have patch, we have the legacy news competition. We have the coupon people who come around trying to get a, and this is just locally, but at the same level, whether it's more B2B publisher sales, we kind of have the same issue. We have lots of competition, and we really need to understand who are we competing with and what are they offering. It's kind of like one of the, one saying is that in order to go fast, sometimes you need to go slow. Or some version of that. But what we want to do before we kind of run into the ad sales process is just like stop and think. A lot of people, when they're getting into that ad sales process, they kind of just do what has always been done. Okay, well, we're going to run an ad here, here, and here. We have these positions. We'll put together a media kit, and then we'll go out and we'll try to sell them. Well, it's really helpful if we stop and we think about what other people are doing as well, right? If they're doing the same thing, well, we probably want to differentiate our product a little bit. We want to understand what they're charging and why they're charging that. And a lot of times there isn't a whole lot of thought that goes into their pricing and packaging process. So we really want to think about the competition and list out our competitors, right? So we're not so much in the sales process as we, typically think of it right now. Right now, we're kind of in a planning stage, and we're going to do that now and for the next couple of steps. First, we want to list out all the competitors for the same advertising budget that we're going after. We want to understand what they're selling and why it may be appealing. So if we have our local competitor, we take a look at what they're offering, and we see that, okay, they've got a leaderboard, they have banner packages, they're charging maybe a flat rate, maybe CPM. Is that all they get? Is there any kind of value add? And we also want to understand their pricing. Now, pricing is a really important piece because when we look at their pricing, we don't want to just mimic it, right? So this is one of the big questions we get for publishers who are just getting started. They say, well, how can I price when my traffic isn't really high yet, and I'm looking at my competitors' pricing. Should I charge what they're charging? And it's, the answer isn't really, well, the answer is more or less no. We'll talk about in the next slide, but we want to understand their pricing, but it's not really going to dictate what we're going to do. We also want to understand how you can be better than them, right? You want to kind of put yourself in that advertiser's shoes. And this is really something that you get better at over time, but you always want to think, if I were an advertiser, right, what would I want? What would make sense to me? And you can usually get a good sense of what it is that they would want. It might be in terms of like the size of the placement they have on your page, or it might be sponsored content that they want, or really the root of it is that they want more business, they want more customers. There's something that they want to do, but you want to understand what your competition is doing, what you can do, and how you can be better. And ultimately, your eventual package that you put together should be the clear leader on the basis of value. You should more or less be offering the best value out of anybody, because that's going to drive people toward you. And many publishers don't actually take that approach. They kind of just go with the status quo without really thinking about what it is that they're offering, whether it's really effective for that client, whether it's achieving what they want to achieve. And this kind of leads us towards this packaging and pricing slide. So I just caught myself at the end of that slide. Just wanted to ask, how do you find out their pricing? I can't imagine just calling them and getting it, considering I may be competition. Actually, so not all publishers, but many of them do post their rates. They will put it on their site. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, people are going to find out eventually anyway. Or if you do end up talking to somebody who's worked with them before, if you're speaking to a client, you can usually say, okay, when you were working with them, what was their setup? What did they offer you? And how much, was that package? So you can kind of, deduce that either by talking to people who've worked with them previously or going to their website. And then Annette, do you actually, that's probably a good question for Annette too.
Yeah. I was just going to say, yeah. Sometimes you have to be a little bit of an investigator and try and get the rates on your own. Often when I get that, I can get that information from clients. I say, well, what are you paying for that? Or what were you paying for that? And they're very open about telling me what it cost them and how much they've spent. And a lot of times I do come and approach clients and they say, oh, I wish I'd heard about you like 3 months ago because I just wasted $15,000 on a mailer. So all that's really good intel. And you can just, build on that with every other client you meet.
Right. So basically we can get that information. And do you have any cases where you can go to the advertiser's website and usually just get that right from their
Yeah,
site?
sure. Sometimes it's published and they can share it. So.
Right. Yeah, we had a few cases in Broadstreet's community group where we had customers saying that that's what they did. But that is useful information. It absolutely is useful information because we do want to know what those other rates are, especially if somebody has really low rates. But what we want to do is kind of keep that in mind and then work it into our packaging and pricing. So this really revolves around some of the first sets of questions a publisher will have for us. They'll say, okay, how do your customers package and price those packages? So
Right.
we have kind of a unique approach to this. What we tell you to do and what our most successful customers do, many of which are, they kind of range in terms of a hyperlocal, city and regionals, and B2B publishers or industry magazines. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll determine what their year-end goal is. All right, so we'll talk about this on the next slide, but we want to figure out a goal. What is that number that you want to hit? And almost every organization that focuses on sales at least has some number that they want to hit at the end of the year in terms of their sales. And what you want to do is start to put together some packages and then put prices on those packages in such a way that it's going to help you move toward that goal. So saying that out loud isn't always terribly helpful, but seeing it, especially on the next slide, will kind of illustrate that. So what we want to do is that we want to determine what packages we can offer that show that clear value that we talked about on the previous slide. So there are two areas where that I think are very helpful to build packages around. One is branding impact. So basically size and position. So there are two primary kinds of publishers or two primary kinds of buys. One is branding, where somebody's really trying to make an impact, establish themselves as a leader in their field or their town. And you can really do that with the size of either like a display ad or the position on the page or the prominence of like any sponsored content that you're running for them. And then there's other people who are trying to communicate a message, trying to tell people around about events that they're holding or about different things that they're doing that people otherwise wouldn't know about, or just simply telling people that, hey, we're open. Is a grand opening. So these are two areas that we want to kind of orient our packages around. And then we want to determine prices for each package in such a way that you can achieve that revenue goal. And this is the reality for most publishers, is that you do have a revenue goal. So kind of taking all this high level stuff and boiling it down to something that's actionable is that at the end of the year, you have a set revenue goal. And let's just say, at the end of year one, you generally want to do about, you want to be at a 10K a month run rate or you want to be at 100K a month run rate, whatever size or stage of being a publisher you have that goal at the end of the year. So really anybody who's in sales should have that number that at the end of the year, this is the number they want to achieve. And if you do have that number, it becomes much easier to break that down into achievable blocks. So we can only stay in business, especially if you're just getting started or you're relatively new to this or you don't have that background in sales. You can only stay in business or only make sense to stay in business if we hit some set number, right? So if you're going to start at the end of the year and at the end of the year you're either losing money or making zero money or $0, like it doesn't make sense to stay in business. But we know what that number is. Okay, in order to keep doing this, it makes sense if I can hit X. And once you have X, right? Let's just say it's 100K at the end of the year, and we use that as just a nice round number so we can break it down and show you what those building blocks look like. So this is a hypothetical 10K a month high-level plan. We talked about this, especially last year in a few different areas of the webinar, but so much of what we're doing comes down to setting that goal and then breaking it up into different packages. And it doesn't always break up so perfectly like this, but it's good to at least see how it could happen. So if we did want to do 10K a month, All right. What we'll probably want to do is make it achievable, right? We can't sell packages at $100 a month because we'd need a lot of different advertisers. We'd need 100 different advertisers to come on board at $100 a month, right? So we need to reduce that, and we need to break it up into more achievable packages where if you're going out and you're selling, you know exactly how you're going to hit that goal, or how you could theoretically hit that goal, and how you could do it without having too many advertisers to the point where it's going to overwhelm you. So in this case, we have, okay, 5 advertisers at $1,000 a month, or 7 advertisers at $500 a month. So we basically, if you add all of these up, it comes up to about 10K a month. So this breaks up nicely, and then you can say, okay, I have these packages. I haven't actually attached anything to them yet. What am I going to put into this $1,000 package? What am I going to do with a $500 package? What am I going to put into that $250 package? And once we put these packages together, then we can go out, start aggressively hitting up people that we think would be good fits for working with us, new advertisers in town or your industry, et cetera. So we're doing this because we want to set prices based on what we need to survive and grow, right? There's no other practical route to doing this, especially when you're just getting started. There's that point where you can hit and you say, okay, this is paying the bills and I can keep doing it. But if you don't hit that number, then it doesn't make sense, right? So we're building these packages around that goal, that like kind of do or die goal at the end of the year. This is in contrast to the way, other people might price it. They might say, okay, well, what if I sell at like, X CPM? Or what if I look at my competition and they're doing $200 a month, so I'll do $100 a month. If you're pricing a product or service, you need to price it in such a way that when you get a certain number of people on board, they are paying their bills, they're paying you to keep doing this. They are sustaining your business and also helping you grow it. So that's so important. Think about what you need to keep doing this at the end of the year.